This was the final footage ever recovered. The image was blurred, shaky, almost unrecognizable. Yet within the static, something moved. At first, investigators thought it was a trick of the light, faulty wiring, shadows bending across the hallway. But then came the sound. A scream, muffled as if trapped behind a wall, cut short before anyone could understand what they were hearing. The camera kept rolling. For 8 more minutes it captured nothing but darkness, broken only by the shape of something shifting in the corner of the frame. No faces. No figures. Just a black outline gliding along the wall as if the building itself had come alive. When the search team finally entered, they expected chaos, overturned chairs, broken doors, windows shattered by escape. Instead, they found silence. Rooms untouched. Dinner plates still on tables. A cup of coffee, half finished, still warm. But the people who had been there only an hour earlier were gone, as though they had been erased from existence. And yet, the shadows remained. Not still, not fixed, but stretching into places where no light should have reached. The more the investigators watched the tape, the clearer it became. What they saw was not an illusion. The shadows bent. They lingered. They seemed to notice the camera. To this day, no one can explain where those people went, or why the footage cuts off just as the shadow pressed closer to the lens. But many believe this was the first recorded moment, when shadows came alive. What you have just heard, is only the beginning. Because tonight, we uncover 5 encounters where shadows refuse to stay silent. Each story more disturbing than the last. Each one connected, in ways investigators still struggle to explain. You will hear about a school where laughter still echoes in empty corridors long after the children vanished. A roadside motel where a man swore he saw his own shadow rise from the floor and stand beside him. A forest unmarked on most maps, where hikers hear whispers that don't belong to the living. A family's home, invaded by a presence so dark even their walls seem to carry its mark. And finally, the case that terrified even the most seasoned investigators, footage of a worker who disappeared as the shadow behind him grew larger than the room itself. These aren't legends. They aren't ghost stories told around a campfire. These are testimonies, records, and fragments of evidence left behind by people who were never the same again, if they returned at all. So watch closely. Listen carefully. And stay until the very end, because story number 1 is the one that will keep you awake tonight. Shadows. We see them every day. On the ground. On walls. At our feet. They stretch and bend, following us wherever we go. Harmless. Familiar. Ordinary. But what if they are not? For centuries, across cultures, shadows have carried darker meanings. Some believed they were the second soul. Others believed they were proof of what lingers after death. The part of us that light cannot cleanse. Think about it. A shadow is not just the absence of light. It moves when you move. It changes when you change. It knows every gesture, every step, every turn of your head. It waits for you in silence. But there are moments, rare, terrifying moments, when shadows break their rules. They move when you are still. They reach farther than the light allows. They whisper when no one speaks. They follow when no one walks. And sometimes, they breathe. Those who have encountered them say once a shadow notices you, it doesn't leave. It lingers. Watching. Waiting. Patient as time itself. And when you realize it's there, it's already too late. These are not stories of imagination. They are reports. Records. Testimonies. Shadows that behave like living entities. Shadows that act with purpose. shadows that do not belong to us. Tonight, we will step into their darkness. And if you watch closely enough, you might just notice something in the corner of your screen. Something that doesn't belong to the light. Something that is watching you. It stands on the edge of a small town. A building most people drive past without looking. To the outside world, it's just another derelict school, windows cracked, doors chained, paint peeling from its walls. But inside, the silence tells a different story. Former students say the school was once filled with life. The chatter of children. The ringing of bells. The chalk scratching against boards. But after a fire 2 decades ago forced its closure, the building was left to rot. No one returned. No one, except the janitor. He was hired to keep vandals away, to make sure the property remained sealed. But he soon began reporting things no one could explain. Late at night, as he walked through the hallways with only his flashlight, he heard it, the sound of children laughing. Not faint echoes. Not tricks of memory. Clear, distinct voices, bouncing off the lockers as if classrooms were still full. At first, he ignored it. Told himself it was the wind, the creak of the old pipes. But then the laughter grew louder. It followed him. From hallway to hallway. Room to room. Until he realized the voices were not just sound, they had weight, presence. He could feel them pressing against the air, brushing the back of his neck, as though unseen mouths were only inches from his ear. He reported flickering lights, bulbs that burned out the moment he entered a room. Chalkboards scrawled with words though no hand had touched them. He described shadows darting across classrooms, small and quick, like children playing tag. Except no children had been there for years. One night, determined to prove he wasn't losing his mind, the janitor brought an old tape recorder. He set it down in the main hallway, pressed record, and waited. For the first hour, nothing. Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of a ball bouncing against the tiles. Slow. Rhythmic. Getting closer. He held his breath as it echoed down the corridor. But when he shined his light, there was no ball. Only a dark shape crouched at the end of the hall. The recording captured it too, first the bouncing, then the laughter. But what made his blood run cold, was what came next. The laughter stopped. The children's voices turned into screams. Not playful shrieks, not echoes of joy. Terrified, desperate screams that filled the hall until the tape cut out with a deafening static. The janitor quit the next morning. He never went back. And the school remains locked, untouched, except by whatever still roams its halls. On a lonely stretch of highway sits a motel almost no one talks about. A small cluster of rooms, neon sign half broken, standing in silence against the open road. For years, it was a cheap stop for truck drivers and weary travelers. But over time, it gained another reputation, one that made people cross the highway just to avoid it. Guests began to disappear. Not in groups. Not in ways that could be explained by crime or chance. They would check in at the front desk. They would unlock their room. And by morning, their cars remained in the parking lot, their belongings neatly folded on the bed, but the guests themselves were gone. No struggle. No footprints. No trace at all. Locals whispered about room 6. They said no matter how often it was repainted, the walls looked stained, as though shadows had sunk into the plaster. Travelers who dared to stay reported dripping faucets that wouldn't stop, even when the pipes were dry. They described shadows crawling across the walls, moving in directions opposite of the light. One guest, a salesman from out of state, gave a statement before leaving in the middle of the night. He had turned off the lamp, preparing to sleep, when he noticed something impossible. His shadow did not follow his movement. It stretched across the ceiling instead, bending unnaturally. Then, in his own words, it peeled away. He claimed his shadow detached, sliding across the room and standing upright against the far wall. He watched it tilt its head toward him, though it had no eyes, no face. He fled without taking his suitcase, leaving the door wide open. By the time staff checked the room, his belongings were still there, untouched. What terrified investigators most wasn't his testimony. It was the footage they later uncovered. A hidden camera installed in one of the rooms, meant for security. The tape showed guests asleep in their beds. The room was still. Quiet. But on the walls, shadows shifted. Slowly at first. Then with purpose. They gathered around the bed, leaning closer, bending over the sleepers as though watching, waiting. And then, just before the tape cut out, a whisper. Too faint to make sense of. Too brief to trace. Yet clear enough for those who have heard it to swear, it wasn't in any human language. To this day, the motel stands. Open to guests. Still renting out room 6. And no one can explain what the cameras recorded in the dead of night. If you were passing down that empty highway, would you risk one night inside? Deep in the countryside, far from marked trails and away from any official maps, lies a forest most locals refuse to enter. It has no formal name. Some call it the Hollow. Others, simply, the forest that whispers. For as long as anyone can remember, strange sounds have been reported there. Travelers who wander too deep say the air feels heavier, the silence thicker, as though the trees themselves are listening. Hikers who braved the path described shadows moving just ahead of them, always out of reach, never close enough to identify. They said no matter how fast they walked, the shadows kept their distance, weaving between the trees, gliding just beyond the corner of their vision. Some described them as tall, thin figures. Others swore they looked more like children, running between trunks. But all agreed on one thing: the shadows were leading them deeper. At first, it was only sight. Then came the sound. The crunch of leaves, timed perfectly with their own footsteps, as if something was mirroring every movement. Then whispers. Soft at first, like distant voices carried by the wind. But the longer they listened, the clearer it became. Words and languages no one could understand. Whispers overlapping, hundreds of them, circling from all directions. Some hikers said they felt breath on their neck as the voices passed, though nothing was there. In one case, a group of friends recorded their hike with a handheld camera. For hours, the footage showed nothing unusual. Just trees, dirt paths, nervous laughter. But as daylight began to fade, the camera caught something the hikers hadn't seen. A shadow figure, motionless between two trees, standing perfectly still as the group walked past. Minutes later, the same figure appeared again, closer. Then, one of them vanished. Not lost. Not separated. Gone. The tape shows the group pausing, calling his name, searching the immediate area. His backpack was still there. His flashlight was lying on the ground, still switched on. But he was nowhere to be found. The camera was left running as the others scrambled, their voices rising in panic. The forest grew darker. The whispers grew louder. And then, the screen faded to black. The battery was fully charged. The recording just stopped. When authorities searched the area days later, they found nothing. No signs of struggle. No trace of the missing hiker. The only thing recovered was the camera, wedged between two roots as if it had been placed there deliberately. Those who live nearby warn outsiders never to enter after dusk. They say the forest has a voice. That it calls to you. And if you stay long enough, the forest doesn't just whisper. The forest screams. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked between manicured lawns and cul-de-sacs where children ride bicycles in the evening, one family thought they were safe. But safety is an illusion, especially when shadows start crossing your threshold. It began with noises. Soft, deliberate footsteps echoing across carpet when everyone was asleep. At first, they dismissed it. The house settling, maybe the hum of the old HVAC system. But the sounds grew more distinct, slower, heavier, pacing between bedrooms. Then came the marks. One morning, the mother noticed faint smudges on the upstairs hallway wall. Handprints. Not hers. Not her husband's. Far too large to belong to their 6-year-old daughter. Each print was darker than the last, as if something oily, almost wet, was seeping into the paint. They scrubbed the walls clean. The next night, the prints returned, higher up this time, as if whatever was making them was growing taller. Their daughter became withdrawn. She stopped sleeping through the night. She told her parents she no longer wanted the light off, not even for a second. When they asked why, she handed them a drawing. A crude sketch in black crayon. A tall, faceless figure, no eyes, no mouth, standing beside her bed. She called him the man without eyes. The parents thought it was just imagination. Until one evening, the mother found her daughter in the living room, talking softly to an empty corner. When she asked who she was speaking to, the child looked at her calmly and whispered, "He listens better than you do." Desperate, the family installed security cameras throughout the house. The first nights showed nothing unusual. Shadows stretching where they should, flickering TV light, restless tossing in beds. But on the fourth night, the footage changed. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the camera in the nursery flickered. And for 6 long seconds, a shape materialized beside the crib. Tall. Unmoving. A silhouette darker than the darkness around it. It leaned forward, its head bent low, as if staring directly at the child sleeping inside. The baby monitor picked up something too, soft static at first, then a whisper so faint it was almost drowned out by the noise. The next morning, when the parents reviewed the footage, their daughter tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, "Did you hear him last night? He says we belong to him." The footage ended there. The family moved out weeks later, leaving behind their furniture, their belongings, everything. The house was put up for sale, but no one stays there long. Realtors admit privately that every time the property is shown, buyers complain about feeling watched from the upstairs hallway. And on the listing photos, no matter how many times they are retaken, there is always a tall, faceless shadow reflected in the mirrors. Always watching. Always waiting. This is not folklore. This is not rumor. What you're about to hear is a documented case. Police records, co-worker testimonies, and security footage all point to one conclusion: something in the shadows was hunting a man, until the night it took him. The case centers on a shipping warehouse on the edge of town. The kind of place you've driven past 1,000 times without noticing, the windows dark, loading bays chained, floodlights humming above an ocean of empty asphalt. Inside, workers carried out the same routine night after night. Boxes, forklifts, endless rows of inventory. Nothing unusual, until one of them began to complain. His name was Thomas Keller. 39 years old. A reliable worker, according to his supervisor. But over a period of months, Thomas began reporting strange encounters during his shifts. He told his colleagues that shadows seemed to follow him between the shelves. That when he stacked pallets, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, figures too tall, too thin, ducking just out of view. At first, they laughed. Warehouse floors are poorly lit, with long corridors of shifting darkness. It's easy for the mind to play tricks. But Thomas insisted. He described the sensation of being watched, of something pacing him from aisle to aisle. He said it breathed against the back of his neck, though when he turned around, there was no one there. One evening, 2 workers decided to test him. They set up a phone camera while Thomas loaded inventory. The footage, shaky but clear, shows Thomas walking with a box. The overhead light flickers. For a fraction of a second, another figure appears behind him, taller, featureless, darker than the shadows around it. And then, gone. The 2 workers swore no one else was there that night. Thomas grew paranoid. He stopped taking breaks outside. He stopped talking to his colleagues. He told the foreman he wanted to quit, but payday was coming, and he said he'd stay through the week. That was the last week anyone saw him. The final recording comes from the warehouse's own CCTV. Grainy, monochrome. 2:47 a.m. Thomas is stacking boxes. He pauses, turns suddenly, as though hearing something behind him. He looks directly into the camera, eyes wide. His mouth opens as if to shout, then he disappears from frame. A box clatters to the ground. Seconds later, the audio picks up a scream. Long, piercing. Choked off mid-breath. The camera shakes violently with static. By the time it clears, the aisle is empty. Thomas Keller was never seen again. His shift card remained punched in. His personal belongings were found in his locker, uniform jacket, lunchbox, wallet. The lock has never been cut. To this day, it remains sealed, untouched, as though even the warehouse managers refused to disturb it. Workers quit in droves after his disappearance. The warehouse is still in operation, but only on daytime shifts. No one volunteers for nights. Former employees claim the shadowy figure still roams the aisles. They say if you stand alone in that building after dark, you'll hear the sound of boxes being moved, footsteps that stop when you stop, and sometimes, a scream echoing from the far end of the warehouse. Investigators labeled the case inconclusive. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just a man who vanished into thin air, leaving only a chilling trail of testimony and footage that experts cannot explain. So I'll ask you this, do you believe shadows can take a life? Or is Thomas Keller still out there, wandering in the dark, waiting for someone else to follow? Stories of living shadows are not confined to one city, one family, or one missing worker. They stretch across centuries, cultures, and belief systems, and yet, no one can agree on what they truly are. Paranormal researchers insist these are spirits caught between worlds. They argue that shadows are not empty spaces, but remnants of entities stripped of form, beings too dark, too hostile to appear fully. Some say they are demons, using shadow as camouflage to hide in plain sight. The silence before they appear, the chill in the air, the overwhelming sense of dread, investigators believe these are all signatures of a presence that thrives on fear. But science offers another lens. Neurologists point to sleep paralysis, when the body is frozen between sleep and waking. In those moments, the brain misfires, conjuring images that bleed into reality. Victims often describe tall, faceless figures hovering at the edge of the bed, strikingly similar to shadow beings. Others attribute it to hypnagogic hallucinations, illusions sparked by exhaustion, stress, or flickering light. By that logic, Thomas Keller's shadow in the warehouse was nothing more than the human mind betraying itself under harsh conditions. Misses. Too many cases. Too much fear. Across the world, cultures have given names to what lingers in the dark. In the Middle East, they are known as jinn, spirits formed from smokeless fire, who move unseen but can shift into shadow when they choose to walk among us. In ancient Rome, they spoke of the umbra, dark doubles that followed every living soul, sometimes breaking free to consume their host. In modern folklore, We call them shadow people, reported everywhere from abandoned houses to roadside motels. Are they all the same? Or are we seeing fragments of different things, overlapping across borders and belief? Some insist these are warnings, signs that the veil between worlds is thinner than we think. Others whisper that shadows are older than humanity itself, and that our fear of the dark is not instinct, but memory. But here is the most disturbing truth: whether you accept the scientific, the spiritual, or the folkloric explanation, none of them cancel the other out. Sleep paralysis may explain a bedroom encounter. But what about the camera footage? The fingerprints on the walls? The vanishing worker whose locker is still locked, untouched? No matter how you analyze it, the shadows remain. Waiting. Watching. Following. And each theory leaves one chilling possibility unanswered. What if shadows are more than one thing at once? Different voices. Different places. Different lives. But the same shadows. A woman from Ohio. Police arrived minutes later. The doors were locked. No one else was inside. A night worker in Texas. His colleagues found the phone. He never returned for it. A family in London. Their infant was asleep when this was recorded. No one else was in the room. A live stream viewed by nearly 300 people before it cut. No explanation was given. Different voices. Different stories. Same shadows. The laughter stopped, and the screams began. A shadow that no longer belonged to him. Whispers in languages no one speaks. And then, silence. The child whispered, "He says we belong to him." Thomas Keller. Gone. His locker still locked. 5 encounters. 5 shadows. One pattern. They're not just stories, they're fragments of the same darkness. And maybe, you've already seen it too. From the school, to the motel, to the forest, to the family's home, and finally, to the warehouse where Thomas Keller vanished, each story leaves behind the same fingerprint. Shadows that don't behave as shadows should. Figures darker than night itself. Whispers that crawl across recordings no one remembers speaking. Researchers have given them many names. Shadow people. Umbra. Jinn. Guardians. Hunters. But no matter the culture, no matter the language, there is always a warning. Some say the shadows are watchers, guardians of a boundary between worlds. That when they whisper, it's not to harm you, but to warn you that something worse waits beyond the veil. Others insist they are hunters. Ancient predators that feed on fear, stalking from the edges of light. Patient. Silent. Waiting until you notice them, because that is when they know you can see. And once you see them, they see you. But the most disturbing theory of all, is that shadows are not visiting us at all. They have always been here. Following us. Breathing beside us. Whispering just out of reach. They are not crossing over into our world. We are the ones living in theirs. And if that is true, then every story you've just heard is not a warning. Whispers overlap, indecipherable at first, then one phrase rises above the rest. We see you. And to this day, nobody knows what happens when shadows come alive. Some vanish. Some are never the same again. And some never speak of what they saw. Think back to the stories you've just heard. The abandoned school. The lonely motel. The whispering forest. The family's home. The worker who never came back. 5 places. 5 warnings. Yet every detail connects to one truth: the shadows are watching. Always closer than you think. But here's the question that matters most. Not what they are, not where they come from, but what would happen if it was you. Would you survive a night with them? Or would your story be the next one whispered in the dark? Comment below which encounter chilled you the most. Was it the laughter that turned to screams? The shadow that left its owner behind? Or the voice that whispered, "We see you"? And if you're brave enough to step deeper into the dark, subscribe, if you dare. Because remember, shadows never leave. They follow. We're already here.